From Pat Patterson quietly keeping a 40-year relationship private while helping create the Royal Rumble to Gorgeous George making Bob Hope openly question his sexuality, to the heartbreaking story of Chris Kanyon whose time in the closet ended in pain, these are 15 WWE legends whose secret lives will truly shock you, starting with Pat Patterson, the ultimate trailblazer. Because anyone who knows wrestling history knows that Pat was not just another wrestler but the first Intercontinental Champion, a WWE Hall of Famer, and one of the smartest creative minds the business ever had, as the Royal Rumble, the wild match fans wait for every January, was his idea. Yet while his talent was celebrated, his personal life stayed mostly hidden since although Pat was openly gay within the wrestling world as far back as the 1970s and locker rooms and backstage staff knew the truth, WWE never officially mentioned it for decades until 2014 when he finally spoke publicly on WWE Legends House about his 40-year loving relationship with his partner Louis Dandario, a commitment that shocked much of the WWE audience who had no idea, especially since early in his Canadian career, he played characters like Pretty Boy Pat Patterson with a slightly effeminate edge that fueled rumors. But Pat was never just a character as he became one of Vince McMahon's closest advisors and a powerful backstage booker shaping many of wrestling's most memorable moments, and when he passed away in 2020, the industry did not just lose a legend but a true pioneer who showed that being true to yourself, even if it takes time, can still earn respect at the highest level of professional wrestling. His legacy is truly unmatched, and every LGBTQ+ wrestler who walks through those doors today owes something to Pat Patterson. But while Pat's story ended in recognition and respect, not every journey in wrestling had a peaceful conclusion, because the struggle of hiding a secret had devastating consequences for someone like Chris Kanyon. A story that hits differently since fans who watched wrestling in the late 1990s and early 2000s remember Kanyon as a creative and exciting performer with a unique move set who could work smoothly with almost anyone. Building his reputation in WCW as Mortis and later as part of groups like the Jersey Triad before moving to WWE where he had brief moments of success, yet behind the scenes he was fighting a deeply personal battle because Chris Kanyon stayed closeted throughout his entire wrestling career during a time when locker rooms were among the most hostile environments imaginable for gay athletes, making the fear of coming out and losing everything completely overwhelming. And after his WWE release in 2004, he finally came out publicly and even embraced a controversial character claiming he was fired for being gay, later explaining that it was partly a publicity move meant to bring attention to LGBTQ+ issues in wrestling. While his autobiography Wrestling Reality revealed the painful reality of living in secrecy, hiding relationships, and battling intense depression, and in 2010 his story ended in tragedy when Chris Kanyon died by suicide at just 40 years old, leaving behind a heartbreaking reminder of what can happen when someone feels they are never allowed to truly be themselves, and an industry that lost a performer who still had so much more to give. And honestly, his death should have been a wake-up call for the entire business because Chris Kanyon deserved better. And hopefully by telling his story it means his pain was not in vain. But moving from a story defined by tragedy, we now turn to one of the most controversial figures in women's wrestling history whose secrets went far beyond her personal life, the Fabulous Moolah, because on the surface Lillian Ellison, known to the world as the Fabulous Moolah, was presented as a pioneer who supposedly held the WWE Women's Championship for nearly 3 decades, earned a place in the Hall of Fame, and was celebrated as a groundbreaking icon. Yet the deeper you look into her past, the more complex and troubling her legacy becomes, as long-standing rumors about her sexuality have followed her for years with former trainees and family members making serious claims, including Sandy Parker alleging that Moolah banned her from visiting gay bars while privately maintaining relationships with women, Luna Vachon claiming Moolah had sexual encounters with female trainees, and Luna's aunt Vivian Vachon reportedly confirming that Moolah was a lesbian, all of which surfaced alongside far more serious accusations that Moolah exploited young female wrestlers in multiple ways. And while those wider allegations are a much larger conversation, the key point is that despite the many rumors and claims surrounding her private life, Moolah never publicly acknowledged her sexual orientation during her lifetime, leaving behind a legacy that remains deeply divided and heavily debated to this day. She worked in a time when being openly gay in wrestling was almost unthinkable, especially for women, so that part of her life stayed hidden even as she was accused of living very differently behind closed doors, making her story messy, complicated, and a reminder that not everyone who keeps secrets does so for noble reasons. And speaking of complicated relationships and long-standing locker room whispers, the next name that constantly appears in wrestling forums and even in other wrestlers' autobiographies is Steve Lombardi, better known as the Brooklyn Brawler, because if you watched wrestling in the 1980s, 1990s, or even the 2000s, You definitely saw Lombardi losing matches regularly since his role was to make others look strong as the ultimate jobber. Yet he was far more than just a background character, as he worked for WWE for decades both in the ring and backstage and earned deep respect inside the locker room. While throughout those years rumors about his personal life never fully went away, especially after Bret the Hitman Hart wrote in his 2007 autobiography Hitman, My Real Life in the Cartoon World of Wrestling, that Lombardi was Pat Patterson's lover, a claim that went far beyond internet gossip because it came from one of wrestling's most famous figures. And although Lombardi has never publicly confirmed or denied any of it and has always guarded his privacy, which is entirely his right, within wrestling circles it has long been treated as an open secret, and what is undeniable is that Steve Lombardi was a dedicated professional who devoted his entire adult life to the business of professional wrestling. He was present through every major era, from Hulkamania to the Attitude Era to the PG Era, and regardless of what his personal life looked like, Steve Lombardi clearly found a place where he belonged in that world, but shifting from a long-time backstage presence to someone who stood directly in the spotlight during the Ruthless Aggression era brings us to a tag team champion whose career was surrounded by constant whispers, Sylvain Grenier, because fans remember La Resistance as the French-Canadian team everyone loved to hate in the mid-2000s, and from the moment Grenier appeared on WWE television, rumors about his private life followed him. Even though his career was solid since he became a 4-time World Tag Team Champion and later moved into a singles role as Sylvain, a fashion model character that leaned heavily into flamboyance and only added fuel to online discussion and locker room speculation, with some fans claiming those rumors may have limited how far the company was willing to push him, especially since Grenier was openly mentored by Pat Patterson, a connection that some people used to exaggerate the gossip, while others rightly pointed out that Patterson mentored countless wrestlers regardless of orientation. And while Grenier himself publicly acknowledged Patterson as an important mentor in his career, he firmly denied any wrongdoing or impropriety, making his story another example of how perception and rumor often followed wrestlers just as closely as their on-screen characters. He was present through every major era, from Hulkamania to the Attitude Era to the PG Era, and regardless of what his personal life looked like, Steve Lombardi clearly found a place where he belonged in that world. But shifting from a long-time backstage presence to someone who stood directly in the spotlight during the Ruthless Aggression era brings us to a tag team champion whose career was surrounded by constant whispers, Sylvain Grenier, because fans remember La Resistance as the French-Canadian team everyone loved to hate in the mid-2000s, and from the moment Grenier appeared on WWE television, rumors about his private life followed him. Even though his career was solid since he became a 4-time World Tag Team Champion and later moved into a singles role as Sylvain, a fashion model character that leaned heavily into flamboyance and only added fuel to online discussions and locker room speculation, with some fans claiming those rumors may have limited how far the company was willing to push him, especially since Grenier was openly mentored by Pat Patterson, a connection that some people used to exaggerate the gossip, while others rightly pointed out that Patterson mentored countless wrestlers regardless of orientation. And while Grenier himself publicly acknowledged Patterson as an important mentor in his career, he firmly denied any wrongdoing or impropriety, making his story another example of how perception and rumor often followed wrestlers just as closely as their on-screen characters. Has Sylvain ever directly addressed these rumors? Not really, because since leaving WWE he has kept his personal life extremely private, and maybe that is exactly how he wants it, yet within wrestling circles his name still comes up whenever this topic is discussed, with the truth being something only Sylvain himself truly knows. But moving from a mid-card name to one of the biggest icons in WWE history brings us to a figure whose inclusion on this list might genuinely shock people: Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid and Mr. WrestleMania, who is widely considered one of the greatest in-ring performers of all time, and while his legacy is firmly secured, his career has long been surrounded by persistent whispers about his sexuality, most of which center on allegations of a secret relationship with Vince McMahon, as several disgruntled former wrestlers have hinted at this idea in shoot interviews over the years, claiming it explained Shawn's backstage favoritism and how much he was able to get away with during his peak years, with even his former Rockers partner Marty Jannetty reportedly saying that many people in the locker room believed these rumors. Yet the reality is that Shawn Michaels has been married to his wife Rebecca since 1999, they have 2 children together, and after becoming a born-again Christian he completely turned his life around from his chaotic early years, consistently dismissing these claims as jealousy-driven rumors from people upset by his success. And despite all the talk, there has never been any actual proof to support any of it. Is it fair to Shawn to even bring this up? Probably not, but the rumors have been so persistent and widely discussed in wrestling circles for decades that any honest look at the subject has to at least acknowledge they exist and leave the judgment to the viewer. But shifting from HBK to someone who made history simply by speaking out brings us to a true pioneer, Darren Young. Because in 2013, he became the first active WWE wrestler to publicly come out as gay during a casual TMZ interview, a moment that carried enormous weight since he was a main roster talent and one half of the primetime players, openly stating his truth at a time when no active WWE performer had ever done so, as before Darren there were retired wrestlers and backstage figures like Pat Patterson who were known within the industry, but no one currently competing had spoken publicly, and what followed was a largely positive response with support from fellow wrestlers, the company, and fans, showing how far the business had come since the era when someone like Chris Kanyon felt that being honest could end his career, while Darren Young went on to have a solid WWE run as a one-time tag team champion with several memorable moments before continuing his career on the independent scene after his release, where he has remained vocal about the importance of representation in sports entertainment. Though it is bittersweet that as of now WWE does not have an openly gay male wrestler on its main roster, making Darren the last to hold that distinction and leaving hope that this kind of representation will return in the future. Speaking of people who played with their image in fascinating ways takes us back to the golden age of television and to a man who helped define what it meant to be a wrestling villain, Gorgeous George, also known as Adrian Adonis, because during the 1980s Adonis stood out as a memorable character who actually began his career as a tough leather jacket-wearing biker type, a legitimately skilled performer who held tag team championships and earned real respect in the locker room, before undergoing a dramatic transformation when WWE repackaged him as the flamboyant and controversial adorable Adrian Adonis, complete with makeup, exaggerated feminine mannerisms, pink gear, and a presentation built on gay stereotypes that generated massive heel heat in that era, which naturally intensified speculation about his real-life sexuality and led fans to wonder whether the gimmick reflected who he truly was, yet by all known accounts Adrian Adonis was married and had children, with some insiders later suggesting that the adorable gimmick was less creative inspiration and more punishment after he gained significant weight and Vince McMahon became unhappy, choosing to embarrass him on television rather than release him. And tragically, Adonis never had the opportunity to address any of these rumors as he died in a car accident in 1988 at just 34 years old, leaving behind the memory of a hugely talented performer whose legacy became forever tied to a character designed to provoke discomfort, and setting the stage for another story involving someone who was openly gay within certain circles even though the wider public never truly knew. Terry Garvin is a name that carries heavy baggage in wrestling history, and his story needs to be handled honestly, because Garvin was not only a wrestler but, more importantly, a booker in the 1970s and 1980s who was openly homosexual within wrestling circles at a time when that was extremely rare, working backstage in WWF for years alongside Pat Patterson, yet his legacy took a much darker turn in the early 1990s, when a major scandal involving allegations of sexual harassment within WWF came to light and Garvin was among those accused, ultimately resigning amid the controversy and becoming more closely associated with those allegations than with his actual contributions to wrestling. And although Terry Garvin passed away in 1998 and his sexual orientation has been more openly acknowledged since then, his legacy remains deeply complicated because while he did live more openly than most in a highly closeted industry, the circumstances surrounding his exit left a stain that is difficult to overlook, serving as a reminder that being a trailblazer does not automatically make someone a hero, as people are complex, stories are layered, and wrestling history, like all history, is filled with figures who resist simple labels. Which brings us from wrestling's past into more recent times and towards someone whose creative partnership sparked years of endless speculation. Kenny Omega may not be a WWE legend in the traditional sense, but his career has intersected with the WWE orbit and he is undeniably one of the greatest wrestlers of his generation, which is why he earns a spot on this list, because fans of Omega already know about the Golden Lovers, his long-running storyline with Kota Ibushi in New Japan Pro Wrestling where they were tag partners, then rivals, then reunited in a deeply emotional narrative that carried more romantic tension than many actual romance storylines, sparking years of speculation about Kenny's sexuality, particularly whether he might be bisexual, as the Golden Lovers storyline had clear queer undertones that both wrestlers embraced, and while Kenny has been characteristically coy when asked, framing the story as universally relatable regardless of orientation and never explicitly confirming or denying anything beyond identifying as straight. What cannot be denied is that he has told stories resonating with LGBTQ+ fans in ways few wrestlers dare. Whether because he personally connects to those experiences or simply because he is a brilliant storyteller who understands that love is universal, leaving the truth known only to him. And finally we close with someone who may surprise newer fans, a superstar celebrated as an ally for years but who has faced persistent whispers about more, Finn Balor, the Demon King himself, who has been one of the most consistent performers in WWE over the past decade, a former Universal Champion, multiple-time NXT Champion, and adored by fans around the world. He has also been one of the most visible allies to the LGBTQ+ community in wrestling, as Finn Balor has worn rainbow-themed gear at WrestleMania, spoken openly in support of LGBTQ+ fans and causes, and used his platform to champion inclusion, which over the years has sparked persistent rumors that perhaps he is not just an ally, fueled by forum speculation about his lack of public relationships, close friendships, and other circumstantial details that in reality prove nothing. Yet Balor has consistently emphasized that his support is about creating a welcoming space for everyone, and the important takeaway is that regardless of whether Finn Balor is gay, straight, bisexual, or identifies otherwise, his advocacy demonstrates that supporting the community matters, especially in an industry that was historically hostile to LGBTQ+ people, showing that someone of his stature openly standing for inclusion has real significance. And perhaps that is the broader lesson from this video. Whether these legends were secretly gay, openly gay, or simply subject to rumors, what truly matters is that we can now have these conversations, acknowledge this history, honor these individuals, and work toward a future where no one has to hide who they are, which brings us to Justin Gabriel, who fans may remember from Nexus, the group that shook WWE back in 2010, with Gabriel, a South African high-flyer famous for his flawless 450 splash, being the subject of rumors about bisexuality that arose from backstage talk during his WWE career. Forum discussions from that era often point to Justin Gabriel's personal life and associations as the basis for speculation, yet the sources are extremely thin, mostly older forum posts and backstage gossip with little to no substance. And Gabriel himself has never publicly addressed any of it, instead building a solid career on the independent scene after leaving WWE, working for promotions like Lucha Underground and various international companies, earning recognition primarily for his extraordinary athleticism rather than rumors about his private life, making it clear that the speculation was largely attached to a talented young wrestler with good looks rather than any real foundation, though the rumors remain part of the conversation in wrestling communities. And shifting back in time to the 1970s brings us to Ron and Paul Driscoll, a tag team most modern fans may not know but whose story holds important significance, because these two were romantic partners in real life who were out to fellow wrestlers but not to the general public, navigating an era when being openly gay could lead to being blackballed from the industry. Yet they managed to perform together nightly as a tag team while keeping their true relationship hidden, which meant working together as partners in every sense while pretending to be just colleagues whenever cameras or fans were present, requiring exhausting mental effort to maintain that separation. And their story stands as a powerful reminder of an earlier chapter in LGBTQ+ wrestling history when staying in the closet was essentially a matter of survival. They may not be household names, but Ron and Paul Driscoll deserve recognition for navigating an incredibly difficult situation during an extremely challenging era. And finally, we end with one of the most memorable managers in wrestling history, Ernie Roth. Better known as the Grand Wizard, a flamboyant, turban-wearing heel manager who guided some of the biggest stars of the 1970s and early 1980s, because rumors about Roth being gay have circulated for decades, fueled largely by his over-the-top persona and backstage reputation, as his theatrical presentation included elements that, for the time, were interpreted as queer by audiences and fellow wrestlers alike. Yet like Gorgeous George before him, there is an important distinction between portraying a character and living that life personally, with the rumors remaining unconfirmed and Roth passing away in 1983 without ever publicly addressing them. But what is undeniable is that he was an incredible manager capable of generating immense heat, working with legends such as superstar Billy Graham, Don Morocco, and Greg Valentine. And while whether he was actually gay, whether the persona was purely a performance, or some mix of the two will likely never be known, his name continues to come up in these conversations, and his legacy as a masterful entertainer in wrestling remains firmly intact. And thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, click on one of the suggested videos on your screen right now for more amazing content.